JP Garcia with the Flipform think tank. I'm here today with an old friend, David Mims. Thank you for being on, David.
Thanks for having me.
This is awesome. I guess before we get started, you want to introduce yourself and just tell viewers about yourself a little bit and who you are, what you do, that kind of thing.
Sure. We're sitting here in Houston, Texas, and that's where I've spent most of my professional career. For the last 15 years since getting out of business school, I have been engaged in IT management consulting. And so a lot of what we do is digital transformations for folks. And that includes building out cloud estates, really since about 2015, 2016. So most recently I was with Rackspace Technologies and worked with client engagement for the Americas, Canada, North America, and Latin America. And prior to that, I spent a lot of time with Emphasis here in Houston, and JP and I were working together on a lot of energy content.
Yeah, that's where we met. Yeah,
Right.
for sure.
So,
And previous to that, you had a whole other career in other things, right?
yeah, previous to that, I started a business in 2002 around the electronic discovery needs for the Enron federal criminal trials. Actually, having worked at Enron previously, I knew a number of the executives who had become involved in that. And we were faced with a huge data challenge. And the software that was available at the time was very much recipe card database systems. You would have all this information and try to search for what it is that you're looking for. You're looking for a needle in a haystack. A lot of times these defense attorneys are looking for exculpatory information.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And to just process the amount of information that was necessary was just, it was mind-blowing. I was dealing with counterparts. I was dealing with the Department of Justice and the FBI that were 2 and 3 agents deep in offices here in Houston, right? So they had a lot of resources.
Sure.
And, their contention is you're guilty and we can prove it, and it's somewhere in these 2 billion pieces of paper, right?
Yeah.
So working with them, became very clear that a couple of things. One, we had to train the attorneys who were very smart and very capable generalists, right? Who didn't necessarily understand the technologies that we were talking about. They didn't understand all the people and the players and the nuances of it. So if we were looking for, kind of smoking guns or silver bullets that were going to help us with this particular case,
Right.
it was real easy for them to miss it. For them to take a look at something and say, that's just not all that important or all that interesting.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Then the second thing was I was telling my client, it's not the data that we have. We need more data than that, actually. I need to be able to go back and say, I need these 5,000 people's Lotus notes, right?
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah.
For the last 5 years. And we need to go through all of that information so that we can start bringing things together. And then using primarily Microsoft tools and things that we innovated within our development group. And then I had a couple of folks who are Westlaw experts who would write these queries, and they'd hit the button and all the lights would dim.
Yeah,
and
sure.
we would find what it was that we needed. So all of that filtering is what we did to go serve those clients. So that we could take the 2 billion pieces of paper and maybe get it down to 10,000.
Yes, no kidding. Yeah, that's amazing. And then so you had that, and then as you mentioned, you and I worked at Infosys for a while in the oil and gas space, and it was just, we're swimming in data and trying to help clients really understand what to do with it even, and we could probably have 10 shows on that alone. So I'll save everybody that one and move forward to kind of the most recent and I guess the most relevant thing for today, right? Because a lot of people talk about cloud, and you led essentially the professional services for Rackspace to do implementations for cloud migration and all that kind of thing.
Right.
And we were talking off camera really just about, cloud is such a big buzzword right now for people. Everybody wants to go to the cloud. Everybody wants to do things in the cloud, right? But, the one thing that I think gets glazed over, and one thing you and I tried to do when we were working together at Rax and previously Annika is this cloud solution, relevant to the business, right? So clearly, yes, you can save some cycles and save some money just by moving to the cloud, but does it make business sense, right? That's what we were talking about before. So I think that'd be a really interesting topic to talk about today. So I guess at a general level, what's your perspective on that?
Sure. And it's interesting because I've heard my peers, for instance, talk to customers and say, if your primary reason for moving to the cloud is because you want to save money, then you've got the wrong reason. And I'm like, guys, I don't know.
Hmm.
Wait a minute here.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is to get to a more granular consumption basis. And I want to be able to tie, good business architecture. I want to take a value stream.
Mm.
What is the activity that we do that makes the business money,
Right.
right? And can we make that as granular as possible? So if I'm selling 1,001 versus 1,000 units, right? Can I just buy that incremental service unit that I need to the best of my ability? And
Mm.
so when we take a look at cloud migrations for customers, we're looking at how can we take those big recurring expenses and then certainly any kind of capital items out of the equation and tie it more to the business. So as the business grows and if the business condenses or changes, right,
Mhm.
then we can make changes very quickly. What I found in particular on some of these customers was one, being able to get more granular gave us a different cost model that was advantageous in the business case,
Okay.
right? Getting licensed out of licensed products like databases and getting in more open source models that didn't have those fees associated with them
Sure. Okay.
open things up for us as well. And then, thirdly, for high availability, for redundancy, for all of the things that you need to make a robust platform that you're going to want to do business on,
Mhm.
right? The cloud to me made that a lot easier and more effective. It
Yeah.
was easier to build pilot-like
Right.
systems that are sitting in data centers somewhere else,
Hmm.
right? And to be able to quickly cut over to those and expand upon those as necessary.
Yeah. So you mentioned something, a lot of things, a lot of good things there. One quick thing that I think is a caveat for folks who aren't really familiar with with how cloud works and why it's not just an outsourced pool of you're not just essentially moving your data center to the cloud, right? Like if you do that, then that is a way to save money, but it's not the most efficient save of money. You mentioned licensing and why having a system that can wheel up and wheel down without licensing costs is important. So, can you dig into that a little bit? Why, for those who don't know, right?
Sure.
Yeah, why is that important?
Some of the major database providers, right? It's not uncommon for even medium-sized businesses to be, spending $1 million or more for a particular, business operation on the license that they pay, for their database on an
Right.
annual basis,
So,
right?
like Oracle or say Microsoft, whatever SQL or something like that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
not to name names, but Oracle, right?
sure.
And
Yeah, yeah.
Oracle has a terrific product and has a lot of history. And uh, on a year-over-year basis, they're going to take a look at what is the usage of this. How are you using our technology, and what is the right way that we're going to charge for that, right?
Right, right. Sure, sure.
And so when I've talked to customers, that's a bit of a source of anxiety for them,
Hmm.
right? That
Yeah.
I'm not, it's like I know what it was last year. I'm not sure what it's going to be next year. And hey, the
Mhm.
business is doing great, but does that mean that I'm getting myself into another echelon of
Of
licensing
tiered
that maybe the
pricing.
business can't quite afford
Correct.
yet,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So if you've got a bespoke workload that you've developed in your organization over a period of time, right?
Hmm.
The company relies upon it. It's solid, it's stable, in the database technology you're running, but
Hmm.
it needs to not go down because that's how the company makes money,
Right.
right? One of the things we're able to do in structuring a migration program is to figure out, do we need an interim step here that gets us, into the cloud perhaps, but maybe not changing the database technology overnight, right?
Right.
And in this
Sure.
particular case, while moving the data and meaning the workloads into the cloud, we retained the database technology we were using and operated that on AWS services, right?
Right.
Now, there's not huge cost savings associated with that because
Mm.
you're still paying for a license and you're paying for the performance that you need out of that.
Mhm.
But you have made one step into the cloud there.
Right.
And what that afforded us was an insurance policy, if you will,
Hmm.
so that we could get a lot of work done. We could start reaping some of those benefits
Yeah.
of, the cost savings and the granular structure of costs that's associated there. and then make sure that we were really, really sure that we were
Hmm.
comfortable with moving to an open source technology, in this case, a PostgreSQL, right?
Right. Hmm.
And that everything would work the way that it was that we had expected and it was advertised, that we could test it well and have plenty of time to experiment with it in that cloud environment.
Right. Right.
And
So,
so if I
yeah.
ask a customer, like, hey, I'm essentially asking you to spend $1 million on an insurance policy here, but here's why.
Hmm.
I'm going to ask you to do that, and this is my counsel, and here's why.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I remember, you and I worked on a client together, and going off of this, going off of that example from the teetered step with the licensed model database, the interim step moving into the cloud with the same, with the same license fee, everything, just lift and shift type thing,
Right.
and then getting to a more cloud native, open source, native type application where we could remove that license fee from
Right.
them. It was super valuable to that client, right?
Right.
And I think that the most impressive thing that I remember was, you know coming up with that roadmap. Number one, when because you started with that client and you came up with that roadmap, but then number two, and kind of carrying to more of the ROI standpoint, is that you came up with a full financial model that showed them where, when, and where the value would hit their books, right? So we knew that, okay, in the first 6 months, this particular part of moving lift and shift, not going to see a lot of incremental value because the same money, like you said, same cost, all of that stuff. But then when we started to do the cloud native development, actually value went negative because we were spending money building a little bit of infrastructure, capital expenditure, that kind of thing. But then when we actually removed the licensing, then you could see, the NPV really just start to climb, right?
Right.
And that forward outlook, that 3 to 5 year outlook, I think really iced it for the client to say, hey, we know exactly what we're doing, and where our NPV is going to be, and they could communicate that to their shareholders.
Right. So rather than, yet another IT expense,
Right.
right? It's, coming into the board or coming into the CFO and saying, this is the transformation project that we want to
Mhm.
do. It may have all these compelling reasons necessary associated with it. We may feel like we need to do it for a variety of reasons, but wouldn't it be nice if there were a compelling business case along with it as well?
Right.
Right. So, to your point, there is a cost. There's professional services costs to do
Mhm.
this, right? There are a lot of costs that are associated with making those moves and getting the architecture done and getting the migrations done and affecting some of these changes in the programming, et cetera.
Mhm.
And so your year one might not look all that great.
Sure.
In many cases with a customer, year one may look like a wash. But when
Mhm.
you get into year two, three, four, five on a 5 year plan, put a discount factor on it, and it turns
Right.
into real money. It turns into a very strong NPV positive project. And so this starts to look like a development project.
Yeah.
And so many times, I don't know about you, but more and more I'm dealing with companies who are either have majority ownership or significant ownership by venture capital companies, by private equity
PE. Yeah.
companies, et cetera.
Hmm.
And so coming to these companies and saying, hey, I need $5 million in order to be able to do this cloud transformation project. Well, they may or may not agree, right?
Hmm.
But if I come back and say, look, the reason you're doing this is because we signed the contract and we're worth 20 million more dollars,
Yes.
on a
Yes.
5 year basis.
Yeah.
What I found is those organizations would say, can you go do this with our other business units,
Sure.
right? Please go, here's, carte blanche to go talk to our other business units and see if these opportunities are there, see what else we can do in these other groups to take more advantage of this and get more and more value out of the investment that we're already making.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's what we did. That's what you did when we got to that particular
Right.
client, right?
And that particular business case, we didn't have all the money in the world,
Certainly.
right? And
Mhm.
budgets are constrained, resources are constrained, et cetera. So part of it was as we were taking that status quo and making those transformations and making the changes and turning on new services in AWS or whatever other services that we were using,
Mhm.
turning off the services that we had to dovetail all of that to see, can we afford to do this? And what's the
Sure.
most cost effective way to do this? And then unexpected things are going to happen. In this
Correct.
particular case, we get, I don't know, well down the road in the project, we're getting ready to go. The architecture is essentially done. And we find out, hey, listen, we've got some business reporting. There's business objects reporting, and nobody likes these reports. They're old, they haven't been tended in a long time, but the
Sure.
business falls apart if they're not running, so we have to
Right.
do something with that.
Hmm.
So, we're able to suggest to the customer, just like, let me take that, let me outsource that.
Yeah.
JP and I are a little bit familiar with
Yeah.
outsourcing, given our past,
Absolutely.
exposure, but,
Sure.
let's get a good crew in here and let's find a cost-effective way to do this so that we can
Mm.
follow the clock, we can work around the clock,
Yep.
we can get this done, and that enabled us to get the project done. And when the customer said, I don't know, that sounds like a lot of money, I'm able to refer back to say, but this is the business case,
Correct.
right? So we had a target ROI, and that allowed me to be in a position of a trusted advisor,
Hmm.
to say, listen, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, obviously. I'm going to run all the plans by you. I'm going to
Right.
keep you updated every step of the way, but you can trust me and you can trust my team to figure out the technology piece of this and to
Right.
figure out the staffing piece of this. We know what constraints we've got to work in, and we want this to work,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And so let me bring home the ROI. Not
Mhm.
necessarily is it going to take you 1,000 hours or 1,200 hours on
Right.
this particular project.
Well, I think that was one of the key things as we were going through with that particular client is we met with leadership very regularly, and all of our new actuals, all of our new unexpected costs, it went into the ROI model, and you were able to say, okay, well, we dipped a little bit in ROI, but it's still within range, and then you can turn it back to the customer and say, okay, what do you want to do? Is this, are you still comfortable with this range? And if not, then we can we can steer a little bit, right? And I think that just the value to the client from that perspective, they were really receptive to being, to what we were suggesting, what you were suggesting, say, okay, hey, yes, we're going to bring in this extra team. It's going to cost this much. It does move our ROI, but we're still within range. You guys want to move forward? Yes or no?
Right.
Right. And it was super for them.
Well, that, and I would say, you know, as inside salespeople, right, as
Hmm.
account managers, and a lot of the work that we've done as principal consultants beforehand
Right.
has an engagement manager aspect to it, but also has a lot of an account manager aspect to it. So there's a little
Right.
bit of selling going on. And
Yeah.
anytime that, our organizations are going to be concerned with, you know, what are you doing to increase your visibility within the organization to get up and up and up the ladder with respect to stakeholders that you're dealing with, right?
Right.
So me banging on the door to the vice president of IT and saying, listen, I would really like to speak to your boss, right?
Yeah.
She may or may not really like that, right?
Right.
Or that may really not even be my place. But
Hmm.
if I'm able to say, listen, the business case here, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's compelling, and that gives them something to get engaged with, then
Right.
I'm able to make them the slide deck so that when the customer, when they're reporting to the board, when they're reporting to the CIO who says, hey, how are these projects going?
Mhm.
We know how they're going, we know where the risks are, we know what to watch for, and we know what it is that we're expecting. And we can, again, to your point, come home and say, are we on target, or are we missing the target? Are we doing better than we thought?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess follow-up question now for this. If you were a brand new client, because clearly we're talking about a client that we've worked on,
Mm-hmm.
delivered value, all of that stuff. You're looking at a brand new client, they approach you and say, hey, David, we want the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you start? What do you do? What do they need? How, we're starting from zero. Let's carry a new client from the beginning through at least to just the end of the plan stage where we have the ROI built, we have the infrastructure specced out, architecture, all of that stuff.
There are a few things. I would say there's a litmus test that I can do using some of the online tools. For instance, the AWS has,
Sure.
the simple cost estimator, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
to be able to say, can I take this status quo workload? Can I model that on, a cloud infrastructure
Mhm.
and see if it just even makes sense? Are we in the ballpark here,
Sure.
right? And then getting so I would tell the customer, how good of a handle do you have on your current estate expenses right now?
Mhm.
Do you know what it's costing you? Do you know what the tiers are? Do you know where the constraints are? How much bigger do you have to get in order to be able to get into a different tier? That sort of thing.
Right, right,
To
right.
put those models in, to model the growth that's expected
Sure.
in the
Okay.
status quo,
Mhm.
and to build that status quo case that says if we did nothing differently other than just continue to grow this estate, which we can do,
Mhm.
then what's that going to do for us, right?
Right.
Then to turn around and take that same estate and those same capabilities and model that using some modern cloud technologies and put the cost down. The great thing about AWS, Azure, GCP pricing is very transparent,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
so it's easy for us to have a real good granular understanding of what things are going to cost us,
Mhm.
and then to do that before and after model, that status quo versus the migration model, and be able to take that and discount it back. And even in these days of elevated interest rates,
Yeah.
many times we find that there's a real compelling story there.
Sure.
And let's just say we know we want to do it because we have other reasons that are compelling, for us to be able to. There's other workloads we want to bring into the cloud.
Right.
This may just be the tip of the iceberg that we want to get into this estate, right?
Mhm.
Having that business case story um, can shut up a whole lot of people who
Certainly.
might be a naysayer to the program,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
Who say, well, there's a risk here, and do we really want to do this? And
Right, because yeah, as you say, it's such a tip of the iceberg
mm-hmm,
in a sense, because what it opens you up to, if you look at it from a strategic standpoint, yeah, clearly, moving and maybe a cost savings is a very good tactical move to make, right?
mm-hmm,
And that's always, you need to be looking at that. But also, if you look at your digital strategy, are you going to want to do something like machine learning or AI? Do you have the computing horsepower to do that kind of stuff? Do you even understand what that means? That kind of
right,
thing. Do you have the expertise in house to
right.
do that kind of stuff? Or, you know, if you don't, then really, if you have it on your roadmap, but you don't have the expertise or the computing horsepower to do it, then the cloud makes a lot of sense,
Right.
right? Because you push it up there and you have tools there, and then really it goes back to now we just need to hire some smart people for a little while to build the thing,
Right.
train the models, do
Right.
all of this stuff, and then we're off to the races again.
So for organizations that have a desire to migrate and modernize, right?
Hmm.
Maybe it's uh, maybe it's not the workload you expected, right?
Right.
Maybe it's another workload that has a compelling business case associated with it that gets your estate into the cloud. So then you have all of this flexibility to be able to apply these other things that you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? Once they're there, then you've got flexibility to be able to apply new technologies, to get different types of talent engaged in it,
Mhm.
and you're not risking turning over the whole apple cart in the middle of
Absolutely. Yeah, because that's a big
experimentation,
risk. That's a
right?
big risk. Yeah.
Precisely.
So how would you then recommend to somebody, to a company, which workload or workloads to move first, right? Do you want, because there's one strategy to say, okay, well, to get the most ROI, the most bang for your buck, you want to put the most the most complex or the most money making one there to streamline it and and get it right, and then increase the profitability of our big thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other strategy is, let's move a test workload up there,
Mm-hmm.
and then let's learn on something that's not mission critical,
Right.
and knowing that that's going to cost more in the long run, but then also maybe it may de-risk us from making a mistake that we don't want to make,
Right.
right? And both are correct. It's just how do you help a company figure out which way they want to go?
Well, you talk a lot about roadmap, right?
Hmm.
And I think the roadmap's important. The benefit of some of the programs, the incentive programs that Google, Microsoft, and Amazon have had, AWS have had over the last few years, has been, like a migration acceleration program, right?
Right.
This allows the provider to give some assistance, to give solution architecture oversight, to be able to provide input with the customer into what the possibilities are.
Hmm.
Um, Being able to take their estate, come up with some sort of a roadmap, and then to start making decisions on, all right, what makes the most sense here? Do we need to move a whole bunch of data? Do we need to retire a whole bunch of storage? Are we
Right.
about to, many times we're in a situation to where, okay, we've got a lease on this data center and it renews in
Mhm.
18 months,
Right.
right? So the clock is ticking and we need to figure out what can we do in 18 months in
Yeah.
order to be able to reduce our reliance upon this data center, if that's what it is that we want to do, right?
Yeah.
Then having a very good understanding of what those costs are, um, without being cavalier, that can be very difficult to get to from
Right.
time to time.
Hmm.
Is what are these things actually costing us? And not only from a personnel standpoint and an expense standpoint, but licensing, as you're talking about,
Right.
and then what is the elastic cost of the next byte, of the
Hmm.
next compute, of the
Right.
next bit of streaming, right? To be able to understand that often to me helps reveal, listen, the presenting problem here is storage, or the presenting problem here is compute, or
Right.
the presenting problem here is that you've got this disaster recovery data center that costs just as much as the original data center, and we need to do something
Yep.
about that.
Sure.
All right.
Yep. 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 Yeah. Absolutely. No. Very good. So one thing, well, this is more of a tangent question, I guess. One thing that we have not talked about at all, but that something like this requires, like for folks in our position, right, is talent,
Mm-hmm.
right? The talent to be able to do this, the talent, so that is specifically the cloud compute talent, the cloud native development, all of that stuff. When you were looking at resources to staff for this, right? So now I'm kind of speaking to my independent contractor audience.
Mm-hmm.
What do you look for in a team member or a set of team members to be able to, from a skill perspective, from a communication perspective, the total package, right? To be able to help you and me and folks in more of the kind of leadership position get to where we're going, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about a lot about delivering value, delivering the ROI. The underlying are the people, right?
Right.
So what are you looking for there?
Let's say during the architecture phase, it's very important that the talent they're going to use to migrate is forming very strong trust relationships with the customer's internal resources,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
When you're in the middle of a migration, it benefits from a drill sergeant type of mentality
Okay.
that
Yeah.
says, listen, we have a list of things that we're going to do. They need to be done in a certain order. We have so much time to be able to do them, and we need to know how we're going to execute these things, when we're going to execute them, what resources it's going to take, and what do we do if we decide to stop in the middle of it and roll backwards,
Hmm.
right? So having those trust relationships are extremely important,
Right.
and
Communication's key for
well,
sure. Yeah.
communication and just I can't overemphasize that, and that is where your engagement manager, your account principal, really needs to earn her chops. We don't have a lot of opportunity to miss, right?
Hmm.
We don't have a whole lot of opportunity to learn on the job.
Right.
And so,
For me, communication is key. Like you have to be if you're somebody as an independent contractor coming in to help, a
hmm
client, you have to be able to communicate and you have to be better than the average in a sense, right?
hmm
Because problems are going to arise and you need to be real vocal when you feel like you're at risk.
that's
That's
it.
number one. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then number two is you have to be really good at what you do, right?
hmm
You're a tech, you're a developer, you're an architect, I mean, but clients are hiring us to be
hmm
the expert. So
Right.
you have to be the expert, but you also have to be humble enough to say, "Hey, I know the tech. I don't know your business," right?
Right.
And there's a difference there, right?
Right.
And to your point about learning on the job, I can't bring somebody on who doesn't know the tech. I
hmm
need a tech expert, but I do need someone who's humble enough to say, I, I know what this tech stack does,
hmm
but I don't know what your work stream
Right. I
is.
don't understand your business as
Yes.
well as you do, and I never
Yes.
will. Right.
Correct. Correct.
So that partnership has to be in place, right?
Hmm.
I think that there has to be, it benefits from having skeptics in the
Yeah.
organization that
Yeah.
are asking a whole lot of tough questions
Right.
as you proceed, right?
Right.
We've all been exposed to projects before that, you end up with a slide that's got a red, amber, green type of
Oh
indicator
boy.
on it,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And everybody wants to see greens and ambers and that sort of thing, and, not make waves.
Hmm.
I think it behooves us to introduce somebody into the governance of the program who
Hmm.
can challenge it in a constructive way
Right.
on a routine basis.
Yeah.
For one project that I worked on,
Hmm.
one of the things that we needed to do at certain points and toll gates within the project is to have the CIOs of the owners of this
Hmm.
pipeline
Yeah.
come in, and I needed to explain it to them.
Right.
Here's our harebrained scheme, and this is what we think we're going to do with
Yeah.
it, and this is what we think we're going to get out of it, and allow them to grill us, right? Did you think about this? Did you think about that? What happens if this doesn't go the way that you thought?
Right.
Do you have rollback solutions, right? What's that going to cost? Have you modeled all of that out? And many times within my customer organizations, it's uncommon to see them have the business analyst, a full-time business analyst talent on board to
Right.
be able to keep that model updated and keep it refreshed so that we can continue to say, are we still looking good ROI wise? It's like, yes, we're still looking good. Or,
Yeah.
can we make this decision? Do we spend this extra money, or not? How do we know? And it's like, you need to have somebody there who can continue to do that.
Right.
Many times in projects, no matter how smart and experienced these folks are, right, they're missing somebody who's running the business model.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that is a key a differentiator for a lot of folks, and for you in particular, because I remember when we were working together at Rackspace, formerly Annika, that was, taking the business slant towards it, right? And forgetting about, we're not as interested in velocity charts and points per sprint, and we're much more interested in ROI and delivery and hitting those value drivers for the business, right? I think that's really what set you apart and set our teams apart from the others, is that we were really making business cases.
Well, and they all mesh together, right?
Absolutely, yeah. You can't have one without the
if
other.
we're not getting the velocity that we're looking for, right? Then we're going to burn too much time and money on the
Absolutely.
transformations that we're working on, and then the business case is not going to work. So, but having that business case rather than just being, come on, work faster,
Yes.
right? Having that business case there, that everybody can have their eyes on the prize and saying, look, if we do this in 6 months, this is the kind of benefit it has. But if we can do it in 5,
Right.
it's this much larger. That might afford us the ability to bring in another workload, to bring on a new technology, to experiment with something that we're interested in experimenting with, right?
Yeah.
All of that is there. And then when we're going back to the board, when we're going back to the executive committee and saying, hey, we'd like to have some more budget for this particular project, if that's the case, right? First thing they're going to turn around and say, well, what's the justification for? What's the business case? And boom, there you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, very good chat. Thank you, David, for this.
Thank you, David.
How can people reach you? Last thing.
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm David Mims, and
Okay.
my email address is davidmims@davidmims.com. And I would love to hear what you guys are doing and see if I can help.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. Thank you all. We'll talk next time.
Thanks, JP.